Anti-communist sentiment in the United States stems from a wide range of factors, as we've previously discussed. How that anti-communism manifested itself in the years after HUAC, though, were not just along the lines of pure ideology, but rather an overlap with ideas of racial segregation and anti-labor sentiments. So much so that domestic security agencies were directed to illegally spy on and harass their own citizens. I'm your host David, and this week we are going to take a look at the actions of the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover that were directed towards leaders of the civil rights movement as well as labor activists. This is the Cold War. If your life is anything like mine, there is always something to do, something pressing, but no matter how busy my day gets, I always take the time to learn something new. That is why I am so thrilled to be working with the sponsor of today's video, a rising star in the streaming world, Magellan TV. Magellan TV is the highest rated documentary streaming app on Google Play, and it offers the best value of any premium documentary streaming service for both its price and especially its quality. And the reason is that Magellan TV is all about the drama of real life. The lives of ancient pharaohs, critical battles in World War I and II, soldiers who fought in the Civil War, the battles for control of the British Crown, the Norman Conquest. Join us in watching Battle for the Moon, a two-part series looking at the fulfillment of one of humanity's dreams and one of the great Cold War challenges, landing a human on the moon. Magellan TV has the largest and best collection of history shows anywhere. Not only are there no ads ever, but your subscription always includes 4K. Click the link in the description and join us today. The Red Scare and rush to out any secret communist influences in the United States would quickly begin to spill over to many other social groups, including the homosexual community, as we've discussed in a previous episode. But another group that would see increasing paranoia around their relationship, whether real or imagined, was the African American civil rights movement that was growing in the mid-20th century. This connection between communists and the African American community had been played upon earlier in the 20th century as well. During the height of the first Red Scare of the 1919 to 1920, race riots had rocked the country in an event known as the Red Summer of 1919. As our previous videos have covered, fear of communism was already part of the narrative of American life, and the atmosphere of paranoid hysteria made anyone advocating for racial equality or labor rights into radical subversives. The close ties between recent European immigrants and radical political ideas and organizations also fed those anxieties. In the middle of the Chicago riots, which had broken out in late July of 1919, headlines about ties between African American community and Bolshevism and the Soviet regime were beginning to be published by major outlets. A federal official told the New York Times that the riots were being caused by, quote, an agitation which involves the IWW, Bolshevism, and the worst features of other extreme radical movements. Giving copies of publications from the African American community that called for alliances with leftist groups, praised the Soviets, held up Eugene Debs as a more courageous leader than the traditional black leaders. The New York Times reported all this under the July 28th headline, Reds Try to Stir Negroes to Revolt. Another headline from October 3rd read, in part, 6 more are killed in Arkansas riots, trouble traced to socialist agitators. In regards to the riots in Elaine, Arkansas. The chief of the Radical Division of the U.S. Department of Justice was charged with providing an analysis of the riots to the Attorney General, and he did so, blaming the racial violence in a general sense on, quote, propaganda of a radical nature, end quote, and charging that socialists were feeding propaganda to black-owned magazines. By the way, the violence visited upon African Americans by white citizens never rated a mention in the chief's report. This chief was a 24-year-old man named J. Edgar Hoover. You may have heard of him. He would begin an investigation into Negro activities as a result of this, targeting the community because he believed that black-owned newspapers like The Messenger and Negro World were preaching Bolshevism. 5 years later, when J. Edgar Hoover was appointed as the director of the Bureau of Investigation, the forerunner to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, he would bring that obsession with him, and the FBI would become a major player in the hunt for communism in America, especially targeting those Americans associated with the civil rights movement. A prepared presentation that Hoover planned to give to the cabinet entitled Racial Tension and Civil Rights, in which he covered a variety of issues, including outlining the background and activities of a number of both anti- and pro-segregation organizations active in the United States. He also cited increased racial tension and violence following the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954. Issues of communist involvement in the civil rights movement featured heavily in the presentation. Just below his outline of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, in which he states that the Communist Party has instructed all Negro comrades to join the NAACP, then adding, quote, "Despite the determined efforts of the Communist Party to infiltrate, this organization reaffirmed its anti-communist stand at its last convention. Since then, the Communist Party has intensified its efforts to infiltrate the NAACP, particularly at local levels." End quote. Hoover then discussed the Communist Party itself. Quote, "The expertness of the Communist Party in pitting class against class has long been devoted to publicly espousing the cause of the Negro as a tactic to recruit Negroes to its ranks. The Communists' intent to inject the Negro question into every possible issue for public consumption, they claim the Till case is a historic event and the turning point in the Negro struggle for liberation." End quote. The Afro-American Congress of Christian Organizations was also associated to the Communist Party by this presentation. The leader of the group, Reverend Clarence William Harding, had been given $100 by the Communist Party as a donation to help advertise a rally in Chicago to help focus attention on the Emmett Till lynching case. But most urgently, Hoover cautioned that the Communist Party was planning to mobilize in Washington during a national conference on civil rights being organized by the NAACP. The party has issued instruction to mobilize its forces for this march on Washington. There is reliable information from the highest level of the Communist Party that Doxey Wilkerson, a Negro communist leader, has had a secret conference with the NAACP leader in New York on the campaign of the Till case. The Communist Party plans to use this conference to embarrass the administration by causing a rift between the administration and the Dixiecrats who have supported it by forcing the administration to take a stand on civil rights legislation with the present Congress. In his remarks to the cabinet in 1956, Hoover specifically mentions the Montgomery bus boycott, which he says had the, quote, potential for acts of violence. And it's likely that through the close watch Hoover kept on that specific situation, that his attention landed on a young preacher and civil rights leader in Montgomery, Alabama, Martin Luther King Jr. Hoover was personally hostile towards King, believing that he was influenced by communists. This hostility would fuel a long, covert investigation into King, which would continue until his assassination in 1968. The Federal Bureau of Investigation ran a domestic counterintelligence program named COINTELPRO, which ran from 1956 to 1971. COINTELPRO enabled them to run a series of covert and illegal projects aimed at surveilling, infiltrating, discrediting, and disrupting domestic American political organizations. Initially, the FBI investigated King under its Racial Matters program, but in 1962, Hoover told Attorney General Robert Kennedy that a close advisor to King was a, quote, secret member of the Communist Party, which led Kennedy to authorize wiretaps on King's home and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the SCLC offices, in 1963. 2 days after his I Have a Dream speech on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., FBI Domestic Intelligence Chief William Sullivan wrote in a memo, "We must mark him now, if we have not done so before, as the most dangerous Negro of the future in this nation from the standpoint of communism, the Negro, and national security." In April of 1964, when MLK said that the FBI was completely ineffectual in resolving the continued mayhem and brutality inflicted upon the Negro in the Deep South, which led to Hoover calling him, quote, the most notorious liar in the country. Not long after, the FBI anonymously sent King a compromising tape recording of him carousing in a hotel room in Washington, D.C., along with an anonymous letter. Keep in mind that King was sexually active with more partners than just his wife. The letter read, quote, "You have been on the record. All your adulterous acts, your sexual orgies, extending far into the past. This one is but a tiny sample. The American public, the church organizations, will know you for what you are, an evil, abnormal beast. There is only one thing left for you to do. You know what it is. There is but one way out for you. You better take it before your filthy, abnormal, fraudulent self is barred to the nation." This was interpreted by SCLC staff and King to be a threat that he should kill himself, or that unflattering information about him would come to public attention. Obviously, Dr. King declined the offer and kept living. In August 1967, the FBI created a COINTELPRO operation against black nationalist hate groups, which targeted SCLC, King, and other civil rights leaders. In the last few months of King's life, the FBI intensified its efforts to discredit him and to neutralize SCLC. Of course, Dr. King and the SCLC were not the only organizations to be targeted by this new COINTELPRO organization. One of the other primary targets for COINTELPRO's fearmongering was the Black Panther Party, which had been formed in California in 1966. In 1968, Hoover would call the Black Panthers the greatest threat to internal security of the country. In order to shut them down, the FBI spread rumors to incite the group to violence. One suggestion for this was trying to create a turf war of sorts between the Black Panthers and another Black Power group, the US organization, by sending fake letters from USO to the Black Panthers, warning that USO planned to ambush leaders of the BPP in Los Angeles, according to the 1976 Senate reports on intelligence activities and the rights of Americans. This same kind of creation of internal strife by the FBI may have led to the assassination of Malcolm X in 1965 as well. It is documented that the Bureau worked to, quote, widen the rift between Malcolm X and the leader of the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad, through infiltration and the sparking of acrimonious debates within the organization, as well as other tactics designed to foster internal disputes, which ultimately led to Malcolm's assassination. At a certain point in the proceedings, the goal of hunting down communists seems to have become simply a pretext for refusing to do anything to address the issues of an African American civil rights movement. For instance, Hoover insisted that communists were behind all the agitation about the case of Emmett Till's lynching, even making this statement, quote, "There has been no allegation made that the victim has been subjected to the deprivation of any right or privilege which is secured and protected by the Constitution and laws of the United States." However, while it might have been a pretext, there were some civil rights leaders that the FBI investigated that very clearly did have real ties to communism. One such figure was the American political activist and academic Angela Davis. In 1970, guns belonging to Davis were used in an armed takeover of a courtroom in Marin County, California, in which 4 people were killed. Davis was charged with aggravated kidnapping and first-degree murder in the death of Judge Harold Haley, and she went on the run, becoming the 3rd woman to ever be on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list. Her membership in the Communist Party undoubtedly played a role in how much effort Hoover put into her capture. She was acquitted by an all-white jury in 1972, something that must have been a little bit frustrating for Soviet propagandists. They had put in extraordinary efforts in 1971. At least 5% of Soviet propaganda efforts through the year were related to her case, according to CIA estimates. But since most of the propaganda had centered around the belief that the court case would not be adjudicated fairly and Davis would go to prison, the Soviets didn't hold that against her though, and when she visited the USSR in 1972, she received an honorary doctorate from Moscow State University. The FBI records vault contains page after page of COINTELPRO generated data on the subversives that J. Edgar Hoover thought were a threat to the United States. But whether they were or not is not the question. On the list of subversives who accounted for thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of man-hours spent on COINTELPRO is Aretha Franklin. Yeah, that Aretha Franklin. R-E-S-P-C-T, make you feel like a natural woman, queen of soul, Aretha Franklin. This 270-page dossier does contain more rational elements of an FBI file, including investigations into online music piracy of her work, which are clearly documents from after COINTELPRO was shut down, as well as death threats against the singer. However, there are dozens of pages that reveal that the FBI kept close tabs on the singer's activities, often using confidential informants embedded in civil rights groups. Hoover's interest in her was probably triggered by her close ties to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, not to mention her offer to pay Angela Davis's bail in 1970 when she was first arrested. Another figure to generate an extraordinary number of FBI documents was the folk musician Pete Seeger, well known for his involvement in progressive causes and organizations. It was his stance on the deportation of Japanese individuals from the United States that initially brought him to the FBI's attention in 1943, leading to more than 2 decades of FBI surveillance and investigation that generated more than 1,800 pages of FBI files and even military intelligence investigations. In the post-war years, the FBI closely monitored his musical performances, appearances at political activities, and his association with anyone linked to the Communist Party. In 1963, when Seeger was playing a series of concerts in Hawaii, the FBI collected information on the shows, noting that an audience member from an avowedly anti-communist organization had reported to them that Seeger had sung a song that was low-key propaganda to the effect that America is a land of conformity. The source also noted that Where Have All the Flowers Gone was inspired by a passage from a Soviet writer. Is it any wonder that Seeger might have sung a song about America being a land of conformity when he and so many others were the subjects of decades of FBI surveillance, investigation, and harassment for being subversive enough to fight for equal rights for all people and against racism? Keep in mind, the names and stories listed here hardly scratch the surface of America's obsession with subversion in the mid-century, whether that subversion was communism, or a simple wish to use the same water fountain or go to the same school as those of another skin color. For decades, one of the key American domestic security organizations dedicated its time and efforts to illegally surveilling and harassing any of its own citizens who refused to conform. For a superpower which prided itself on being a bastion of free speech and free thought, the truth was anything but. We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and to make sure you don't miss our future work, please make sure you subscribe to our channel and are illegally surveilling anybody you think may not be willing to press the bell button. Please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/thecoldwar or through YouTube membership. We can be reached via email at thecoldwarchannel@gmail.com. This is The Cold War Channel, and as we think about the Cold War, please remember that history is shades of gray and rarely black and white.